All right, welcome back. And now we are going to finish up with Module 7, or at least my lecture section of it, by closing out on lobbyists and interest groups. So, all that I've told you probably indicates to you that interest groups and lobbyists have quite a bit of influence on government policy. Quantifying that, though, is very difficult because how do you actually show that? Could we just take a poll of members of Congress? Could I call up? There are 435 House members and 500 and 100 senators, so a total of 535 people. If I were to call the offices of all 535 and ask the question, have you ever changed your vote based on lobbying? You think anybody would say yes? Probably not. So that must mean lobbyists are not influential at all, right? Well, close to $4 billion is spent on this, on lobbying every year. So obviously, there must be some evidence they're influential. You don't spend that kind of money on something that doesn't work, or at least you think doesn't work. So they are influential, but quantifying their influence is pretty difficult. I have seen surveys of lobbyists where, and there's been more than one, and they multiple different surveys, and usually over 70% of lobbyists will report in these surveys that they have actually written legislation. So they have written bills and then given those bills to a member of Congress who has then proposed them and then ultimately voted on them. And if they pass, they become law. So lobbyists are writing our laws. Now, I will say again, this might be overstating it a little bit because these are lobbyists that were surveyed. And as a lobbyist, you want everyone to believe you're all powerful because that's how you get clients and that's how you charge a lot of money. So they may be exaggerating a little bit here on this, but I think it is fair to say it is pretty well known that lobbyists do write legislation sometimes, oftentimes. So they are powerful, is the point I'm making here. And of course, they are just instruments of interest groups whom they represent. All right, so this brings us to a question. Who really governs here? Who has the power? Do the average people have the power? Is it the power elite? The people who are hiring the lobbyist? Well, I don't know. Or is it a middle way? What Elmer Erich Schnatschneider, who was a political scientist, I'm guessing of German descent, who argued for a system, or no, actually, I'm sorry, he argued against a system of pluralism. Pluralist was the idea that there are a whole lot of interest groups in this country. If I think of an issue, abortion, for instance, there is Right to Life, which advocates for pro-life policies. There's NARAL, which advocates for pro-choice policies. Do they effectively cancel each other out? Yes, a lot of money is spent on pro-life policies, but if an equal amount of money is spent on pro-choice policies, do they basically cancel out? Like 5 tons of weight is a lot of weight to be pushing in one direction, but if there's 5 tons pushing in the other direction, nothing moves, right? It doesn't really have an effect. So that's the idea of pluralism. And Elmer Erich Schnatschneider gave us the famous quote: "The flaw in the pluralist heaven is that the heavenly choir sings with a strong upper class accent." So what's he saying here? Well, what he's saying here is that pluralism is true to some extent. However, at the end of the day, some interest groups are going to have more money behind them than others. And those that have more money behind them are probably going to be more influential. So, yes, it is true that that pluralism does keep it from being too extreme. However, it is still going to be tilted a bit towards those with money, which is probably an accurate thing. All right, self-service or public service, or interest groups you think looking out for themselves or for the good of the country? Well, this is a probably difficult question because most people think that what's good for them is good for the country, right? Like most, it's pretty rare that someone would be in a situation where they would think wow, if we do X, this will benefit me. If we do Y, this will benefit the country. Most people will not think that way or will not allow themselves to think that way. They'll decide that, or they will honestly believe that what's good for them is good for the country. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but they will generally think that it is. And they will rationalize it. If they don't automatically think that, they will probably rationalize it. What are some of the most powerful interest groups in America? This is a question you can ask yourself. And are they looking out for America's whole? Also something you can ask for yourself. All right, so some open or closed routes to influence. One thing to keep in mind here, tightly knit groups of specialists can sometimes control entire policy areas. You see this especially in areas that are kind of obscure, that not a lot of people know about. Example I use is U.S. policy towards Myanmar. Myanmar, if you don't know, used to be Burma. It's a country in Asia. If I were to ask 100 people on the street to locate Myanmar on a map, I would guess fewer than 5 could do it. If I were to ask them to explain what current policy is towards Myanmar, I would guess probably 0 could do it. Maybe 1, maybe. So almost nobody knows, almost nobody has any idea about it. And this is going to be true probably of most members of Congress too, because there's almost 200 countries in the world. Myanmar is not one that's super relevant to U.S. interests. I guarantee you, though, there are people, a few people, handful of people, either at universities, State Department, who have spent their entire career studying U.S. policy towards Myanmar. If suddenly this becomes an issue, who are members of Congress, who are the president going to contact for advice on that? Probably those people, and probably those people will give advice, and members of Congress, the president will probably follow it. Because, again, this is not something that normal people know much about. Now, this is insignificant now, but just because it's insignificant now doesn't mean it will always be. Go back to 9/11. How many people in the United States knew anything about Afghanistan or the Taliban, right? If you knew something about Afghanistan or the Taliban, then for years up until 9/11, you were probably languishing somewhere in total obscurity. But now suddenly everybody wants to know, right? So sometimes these issues do explode and become super relevant all of a sudden. All right, I'll come back to the Iron Triangle just a second. Military-industrial complex. This is the self-serving interconnection between the military, defense contractors, and oversight committees. So when Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, left office in 1961, he gave a speech in which he warned of the influence of the military-industrial complex. You may know that Eisenhower's background before he's president was he was a general. He was career Army. So he had some like credibility and some or great qualifications to speak on this. And his argument was this. Prior to World War II, the United States did not maintain a large army or navy during times of peace. We had West Point and Annapolis, who would churn out officers every year, and we'd have a small number of enlisted men, but we mostly kept sort of a bare bones military. When we went to war or thought we might, there would be a call for volunteers, and if we didn't get enough volunteers, then we'd institute a draft and we would raise an army, raise armies, raise a navy, and build it then. What happened at the end of World War II made that no longer viable because we have nuclear weapons now, and so does our enemies. If we are, subject to a nuclear attack, we do not have time to call for volunteers, bring them in off the streets, get them combat ready, which can take months. We need to be ready to go at a moment's notice. So post-World War II, we are going to maintain a large peacetime military for the first time in U.S. history. And this is necessitated by reality on the ground. Eisenhower's point here is that this is necessary and we have to do this, but this creates a whole new industry, armaments industry. In the past, World War II, Detroit stopped rolling out cars, civilian cars, and started rolling out Jeeps for the military and tanks for the military. Once the war was over, they stopped rolling those out and went back to rolling out civilian cars again. Well, that's not how it works anymore, because now we have permanent industries who produce weapons and military materials. And Eisenhower's point is that people in these industries have an incentive for conflict, because what happens to arms manufacturers when there's a war? Demand for their products go way up and they make more money. So his argument here is that, and again, this is necessary. He's not saying we should not have these, but what he is saying is we need to be careful with this, because we have now a wealthy and powerful class who has a vested interest in war, basically. And of course, we saw, in Spanish-American War with William Randolph Hearst, we saw that it is possible basically to lobby us into war. The term lobbying would have been what was used, but point remains. And so he's arguing here at the military industrial complex, we need to be very careful about this moving forward. All right, Iron Triangle, look at this. As you can see, Congress provides funding and political support to bureaucracy. Bureaucracy provides low regulation and special favors to interest groups. Interest groups provide electoral support to Congress, and rinse, lather, repeat. Who's left out of that? You and me. All right, so regulation of interest groups. 1946, Congress passed a legislation which required lobbyists to register as lobbyists. And what this means is that if you are a lobbyist, you have to register with the clerk of the House of Representatives, and it is public record that you're a lobbyist. I think you get a badge that specifies you as such. So this is so that when you go meet with members of Congress, they know that you're a lobbyist. You're being paid to advocate for this. You can't pass yourself off as just a concerned citizen or concerned constituent or whatever. This was the first congressional attempt to control lobbying. It was 1946. In 1953, the Supreme Court ruled that it applied only to lobbyists communicating directly with members of Congress. 95, more legislation was passed, and this defined a lobbyist as someone who spends at least 20% of their time lobbying. So if you have a broader job description and only a small part of it is actually lobbying, less than 20%, you don't have to register as a lobbyist. Otherwise, you do have to register. Gifts to members of Congress worth over $50 generally are not allowed, but this doesn't apply to grassroots lobbying. And there are been some reforms that have happened post Jack Abramoff. They talk about those in the video you watch, so you can see that for those. And we are now done with lobbying and interest groups. And when you finish this module, you'll be done with module number 7, which means you are 70% of the way through this course, more than 2/3. Now time is very much becoming a factor. If you're not where you want to be, you're not doing well, you need to reach out to me. Like I said, and I've always said before, I'm here. If you have problems, have questions, let me know. I'll work with you as best I can to get us through them. But don't wait any longer. We're getting close to the end here now, and for much longer, the die is going to be cast. So let me know. Otherwise, I will see you back here next time when we talk about Congress. Have a good day.